You're listening to TGI Sports Talk with your host, Keith Angle, on Northeast Streaming Sports.
Good morning, everybody. Keith Angle for TGI Sports Talk. We're live in East Greenbush, New York. Still the only live streaming sports talk show from East Greenbush. Our claim to fame. That with our great guests. I want to thank all you guys who'll be in the room live today. All of you that will watch it later. All the groups that I show it to. My normal disclaimer. Any groups I share this with, I guarantee you there'll be relevant content. You guys have done a great job with viewership and sharing the show, and I hope you continue to do just that. So thank you for that. I want to thank my guest from last week. Good grief. I'm having trouble remember who I had in last week. Isn't that awful? I have got a brain fart. Somebody help me out here. All right, Keith disappeared for a second. He's having great technical difficulties this morning. When you turn 61, things get a little fuzzy in your head. So, again, I apologize. Dick Weiss was my guest last week. I don't know how I forget the immortal Dick Weiss. My guest today, as we head into our March Madness mode, is going to be Matt Brust, former St. John's standout in the 80s. Oh, I hate to say that. Sorry, Matt. But we'll talk about his time at Syracuse. Boy, I got Syracuse in the brain. He might even punch me out for saying Syracuse. Good grief. St. John's. His time with Coach Carnesecca, Big East tournament. How different things might be today. We'll talk about a lot of stuff. We're going to have a big show coming up on the 8th of March, previewing the Big East tournament. So we'll talk more about that as we go forward. Look for the promos for that. And with that, I guess we'll bring in Matt Brust before I screw this thing up any further. Good morning, Matt.
Good morning, Keith. How are you doing?
Well, I was doing well until I started pushing buttons. Got to be careful.
I heard the Syracuse comment. You're okay. You're safe. I have friends at Syracuse. On the court, they were enemies, but off the court, we're good friends.
Well, it's very funny because I have Tony Red Bruin coming on with Eric Sandifer next week.
Oh, wonderful.
And, I think that's how that popped in my head. I mentioned your name to Tony when I was on the phone with him this week, and he remembered. He said, I don't know, he's a Long Island boy.
Yeah, Tony was a couple of years ahead of me.
Yeah.
Don't tell my son that, but, again, since we're dating ourselves, we'll keep that under wraps.
Oh, God. Sometimes I go, 1980, what? Come on.
Yeah, believe me, it feels the same way. It's I just tell people I'm over 21.
There you go. There you go. That covers a lot of ground. So I want to welcome you today, Matt. Thanks for coming on. And, you it's funny. I'm not an overly religious person, and this probably doesn't matter in the conversation, but I find myself attracted to Catholic universities for whatever reason. There was a time when I was very young. I was a big Marquette fan. I had Lloyd Walton on recently, and Butch Lee's coming on in a few weeks. And as I got a little bit older and the Big East formed, I became a big St. John's fan. You'd think I'd be a Syracuse fan out in my area, but I kind of migrated because I like Coach Carnesecca, and I migrated to St. John's. So it's interesting where my interests run to. So you grew up in Long Island, I believe.
Yes, Battling, Long Island, small town out east.
And what? So talk about your days. When you got to the point where you were colleges were looking at you, I suppose, and you were looking at them. Talk about that recruiting process and what was that like for you?
Well, it really was actually a confusing time, to be honest. My family, my brothers, and even my sister were heavy into sports. In fact, we have a family joke. My sister was 6'2", and from being a freshman in high school to college, to senior in high school rather. I think they won every game in every sport. So she's the one who's got the most wins out of all of us. My oldest brother Jerry was a baseball guy and played for the University of Miami and went to the College World Series. Wonderful right-handed sidearm pitcher, and did very well. Got hurt unfortunately in the old days. If you pull or tore something in the 70s, it was pretty much you were done.
Yeah.
But, then I had my brother Chris played at North Carolina, which I'm sure we'll get to in a little while, on that '82 team that won the national championship, and of course me at St. John's. But as far as the recruiting process went, it was interesting. My junior year, I used to run cross country before the basketball season, and here I am, this 6'5" guy, not built for running at all, and I just did it to get in shape for basketball. So I got this crazy idea from God knows who that you should play football to toughen up. Here I was 6'5" square. So I don't know what the idea was, and I got out there, and the football coach was thrilled. I was the biggest kid in the school, and he's like, "Okay, whatever you want to do." And I was like, "Can I kick the ball?" He goes, "Can you do a little more than that?" So I ended up. I really love football. I mean, you could actually hit people, and you weren't called for a foul or do things like that. And so the confusing part came in was I started to get recognition for football, and I didn't really quite understand it. And went into my senior year, loved it, and it turned out I got recruited probably more for football than for basketball, which was my football coach would come down. He was a health teacher at the high school. And would come down. He goes, "I've got Howard Schnellenberger in the parking lot. What do I tell him?" I'm like, "I have no interest in that." And he said, "I have Lou Holtz, on the phone." And he would come down. Probably goes, "I just told Lou Holtz to forget it." I said,
Really?
"That's not a good
Wow.
thing." But as far as my recruitment in basketball, yeah, I mean, there were a few schools that stood out. Michigan State, St. John's, of course, North Carolina came in, and Notre Dame. I remember, obviously, people looking back in time. Since my brother played at Carolina, a lot of coaches would say, "Have you heard from Carolina?" And I'd say yes, and they would just leave. So, which was appropriate because who wouldn't want to play at North Carolina as a 17, 18-year-old? So
Okay.
it was a bit treacherous. And I said, "Well, you could play both sports." And I said, "No." I said, "I'm in small league 5 in Babylon, 100 kids in the school, in the class, and I'm 6'5" out in the field playing against guys 5'11". And I said, "And I'm not going to mull the field." I said, "College, they're all looking me in the eye." I said, "Not going to do that." So I opted for the basketball, and yeah, it was it was the old days. It was very personable. The coaches come to the house, and
Yeah.
so our rug was kind of worn out, with between my brothers and myself, with the coaches coming and going.
What were some of the other name schools that were really high on you?
Well, Michigan State, Judd Heathcote was at a lot of games, and he goes, "You can come and play at Michigan State." We had Irvin. I said, "Who's Irvin?" And, yeah, and then my teammates are, and I said, "Who?" I stood up in the locker room once. I said, "Who the heck is Irvin Johnson?" And they're like, "You really are out of it. You did play too much football."
The magic name didn't stick in East Lansing?
Yeah. So I was like, "Okay," and okay, I get it now. Yeah, him. That guy. He's really, really good. But yeah, and Michigan State was pretty high on me, and of course North Carolina was, and St. John's. That was kind of the final 3 that I was down to.
So what was the determining factor? I mean, Dean Smith did a lot of recruiting in, well, I make this mistake of saying the New York City area. I know Long Island. My wife gets mad if I say this, New York City, Long Island. It's not the same. I get that now. it's been pounded into my head.
Right.
But in that downstate area, he did a lot of recruiting. He got a lot of kids to go down there to Tobacco Road. What was the thing that drew you down there and not St. John's originally?
Well, I'll go to the genesis of Dean Smith. Before him, obviously, was the great Frank McGuire, and who was incidentally very good friends with Lou Carnesecca.
Yeah.
So Frank had gone down there in the 50s and won the championship in 52. And Frank started recruiting from New York. He was a New York guy,
Mm-hmm.
and started bringing guys in. So I think Coach Smith followed that formula, and it seemed to work. And look, you get recruited by a school like the University of North Carolina, and you go down there. It's beautiful campus. Education is wonderful. You got probably the best X's and O's coach ever. Who could? Why? How could you say no to that? So it really wasn't much of a choice. And my brother had been down there. Of course, Michael Jordan was down there. Knew him.
So, yeah.
It was pretty much I knew from once they called. I said, "Oh, that's going to be it."
You joined a pretty talented team. Brad Doherty was on that team, I believe, and Kenny Smith. And if I remember, you guys lost in a regional final that year. What was the experience like going from Babylon High School to the ACC and these big crowds and playing in the NCAA tournament in front of huge crowds and huge TV crowds?
Well, my tenure at North Carolina, I lasted there through January of that year, so I didn't get to play in the tournament. Oh. I had decided to come back to St. John's, but to your point, being in New York, in those days, they used to have the old Newsday Classic, and I think the Newsday has probably 4 pages left of circulation, so, and I used to play at the old, as Lou Carnesecca would call it, the old Island Garden, which was the Nassau Coliseum. And it would be Long Island Stars against New York City Stars. And in those days, we had, like you said, Kenny Smith, Pearl Washington, the late Pearl Washington.
Yeah, great player.
His passing. Walter Berry. We had everybody. And the place was packed. And so, and going to the games, my brother's baseball games down in Miami, and see my brother Chris play. Our family would travel down to Chapel Hill, and so I kind of I had a head start on it. Let's call it that. So
yeah.
It didn't necessarily bother me. It was really a fun experience.
So your career ended prematurely at North Carolina, and what kind of prompted you to make that decision to move back closer to home and go to St. John's?
Well, I was always a New York kind of guy, and I enjoyed my time at North Carolina. And I'll say this: the hardest part was really leaving the guys. One of my great friends, Dave Popson, who was an incredible basketball player. I think if he might have been in a different situation, or I think he would have been a 10-year pro. But what a great guy. But I just was a New York guy. My family was from New York, and literally suffering all those station wagon, which they don't call them anymore. They don't even have them. The station wagon drives with the back window down, and you're sucking the fumes and going down 95 to Florida or Miami. It took a toll on my parents, and I wanted to perform near home. I had all my friends in New York, and I just was a New York guy, and I just it wasn't. I didn't quite feel that I fit in too well there.
Well, you had to sit out a year, right? I mean, how was that tough, sitting out that year?
It was, but I'll tell you, it was quite a learning experience. What I did was I came. Well, when I was going to transfer, I talked to Coach Smith about it, and he had some ideas. I had other ideas, and that the year I transferred was that 85 year with the great Final Four, probably one of the greatest Final Fours ever. Was St. John's, Georgetown, Villanova, and Memphis State. And so I came back to New York, and I cannot say enough, and you'll hear it probably throughout this interview about Lou Carnesecca. He was an incredible coach, an incredible motivator, and just a wonderful father figure. And I remember redshirting, and I said, "Well, I guess I'll see you in a year. I'm not quite sure what to do." And he said, "No, no, 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 no. You're going to take 2 classes, so I see your ugly face." So, so I actually worked in a garage of a friend, a car garage, a Toyota dealership, and I used to prep cars. So I went from playing in front of a lot of people, doing a lot of things, to a very humbling experience of prepping cars. And so I became laser focused on what I wanted to do, both basketball wise and also academically.
It's important.
Yeah, and a lot of kids at that age, and even today, don't take that as serious, because not everybody makes it. And I feel bad for, I see guys who go hardship, and they're told by different elements that they're going to make it, and they don't have anything left. So they go back to their hometowns and just kind of talk about the 3 or 4 games they played that were good, and it's kind of sad. But so that's what I did. I basically worked in a garage, and I would come in and work out sometimes with the team. I actually sat out. It was a year. It turned out to be a year and a half, because I had left mid-year from North Carolina.
Okay, that's funny. You come into St. John's, and there's really no pressure. You're only joining a team that wasn't too far removed from 30 back-to-back 31 win seasons and Final Fours, and had a lot of talent. I mean, Chris Mullen was gone by the time you got there, but Walter Berry was still there, right?
All those guys were there. The great Mark Jackson was there. Willie Glass was there. Shelton Jones, who was a rival in high school. He played for Amityville High School, which is a neighboring town in Long Island to Babylon. And I never really considered what I was doing, and thank God I didn't, because I probably would have really been panicked about the choice I made. But I just assumed that, well, whatever I'm going to do it near home. I have friends, and and then it was just me and my mom, and I thought, well, my mother can come and see every game, instead of worrying about, we have to save the money to go down and take the broken down station wagon. Hopefully it didn't break down in Delaware, and we had to walk the rest of the way. So,
well, you guys still, I mean, we're still very successful as you got, your career got started. I mean, you were an important cog in the team, if not, at the top of the leaderboard and scoring and whatnot. But I would say you were probably a very important cog in that team, and you were still very successful that first year, right? 21-9. You get to this second round, I think, of the tournament that year. Correct. So now you do get to experience that Big East feel. What was that like? The Big East feel?
Well, the Big East in those days, really, it was wonderful basketball. I mean, thank God for me, because there was I'll call it hard hand checking allowed and things like that. So I didn't move my feet too fast, so I relied on my forearms a lot. But it was terrific. The unique thing about St. John's University, outside its stellar coaching staff of Lou Carnesecca, Brian Mahoney, great friend, great mentor, Ron Rutledge, great friend, great mentor. They had been together for years, and when I got there, and I'll get into the playing in a minute. When I got there, it was I'd shown up on the campus, and the university is lush and developed now, but it's in the middle of Jamaica at the time. Right. Kind of like a cement block. And here I'm coming from North Carolina, coming to, the courts outside. I wasn't sure, it was being silly. But no, the unique thing about St. John's was our home was Alumni Hall, of course, but it was Madison Square Garden. And Madison Square Garden was just a magical place to play. I mean, it wasn't your normal college student body audience. It was real New York people. So, the press corps from North Carolina, you'd had 3 or 4 reporters in the room after the game, and at St. John's, you'd have about 25. And they weren't lobbing questions. And, to Coach Carnesecca's credit, there were so many educations within an education dealing with the press. And, and the way we talked, and, just it was always keep your mouth shut and be like, Coach, it's an interview. I'm not sure. Even today, we had talked pre-show. I had spoke to him yesterday, and I said, well, if you're up to it, and he's doing very well, 96 years old, God bless him.
God bless him.
And I said, I'm going to be on this show, and he said, hey, keep your mouth shut. Don't say anything bad about the family. So, all my teammates understand what that means, and it's just. But playing in front of those crowds and the Big East crowds, and Pittsburgh was a tough place. Syracuse, of course, was an interesting place. Syracuse was really different. People were, if you're watching it on television, it's very daunting looking at the crowd. They said, oh, there's 30, 40,000 people here, but they would play in the Carrier Dome, which was basically the end zone of the football stadium.
Right.
So the crowd was really kind of. I was a little surprised when we took the court. It was almost like you heard like an echo, and because people were so far back, because they put people up in the rafters, and it was in it was a football stadium. But again, there wasn't a lot of room for error because you heard it in the Big East, and that was made it so great. I mean, Villanova was another place. It was just a tough place to play, and it was Northeast basketball.
The league had really come into its own by then. It had only been around, I guess, 6 or 7 years by the time you joined there, but the league had really exploded and really, I think, really, put a spotlight, obviously, on basketball in the East that hadn't been there before.
Well, a lot of these teams got to keep the kids in the East, and and that's probably why it exploded. And you had some great coaches. The late John Thompson was an incredible coach. Really built up. Georgetown's. I think of Georgetown. I think of it's a law school. But it's. He really did a great job. We had some great battles with them, and Coach Boeheim at Syracuse constantly was able to recruit and an exceptional recruiter. And then there was St. John's, and it was like that trifecta of teams, and then Villanova would come along. And in my day, we would play teams like Connecticut in Hartford, and it was like a night off. And poor Jimmy Calhoun, it was
Was he not there yet when you were at St. John's?
He was there.
Okay.
He was there, and
I thought so. Yeah.
I don't know how that poor guy slept at night. I mean, it was tough going for him, but to his credit, he built a great program.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah, I mean,
there were some big personalities as far as coaches go in that league. I mean, it seemed like every team had this huge personality.
Oh, absolutely,
and which made it a lot of fun.
For sure.
Did you ever see the sweater? Did you ever get to see the sweater? Was that gone by the time you got
there? Yeah. The sweater got packed away. That was kind of a fun thing between Coach Thompson and
very funny.
Coach Carnesecca, of course, old world kind of thinker, and very don't step on the crack in the sidewalk or else you're going to lose. So he wore the same clothes, and his wonderful wife Mary, I'd say I hope she's washing that, and he'd be, don't be a wise guy, it's getting washed. But the sweater was gone, and I'm sure you remember the great when their win streak was snapped at Madison Square Garden. He had come out of the jetway rather. Coming onto the court with towels, like Coach Thompson used to throw a white towel over his shoulder. Yeah. And he came out, and the managers had sewn together about 50 towels. Now I'm looking at this, from the sideline, and I'm saying, Coach Conosecca he's not going to be able to carry that. He's not going to be able to drag that. It's just going to pull him over. But he came out, and it was a great laugh. And like you said, there was a ton of personality in that league. And it was just wonderful basketball.
Well, speaking of personality, so I'm sure that you, in your move back to St. John's or to St. John's and back to the area, the difference between Coach Smith and Coach Conosecca, I'm assuming there was some huge differences in their approach to the game. Is there some stuff that stands out there that you want to chat about?
Sure. I mean, Coach Smith, again, was an incredible X's and O's coach. He was extremely cerebral, way ahead of his time with the way he approached the game, and that's why they won. It was very different going from the campus life of a North Carolina, and it's kind of like a sales effort with these coaches. You have to be a philosopher, you have to be a psychiatrist, you have to be a salesman, and then you have to coach. So it was not easy for these guys to get kids, but North Carolina was a wonderful place to visit, and I'm not sure any 17 or 18-year-old would really say no to that place. And I think the place and the coaching staff and their tradition always got them players. Coming to St. John's, the wonderful thing about Lou Conosecca was, I remember my first college game, or my first basketball game I ever saw, was St. John's playing Manhattan at Alumni Hall. And poor coach, he's going to hate me for this, but I was probably 8 years old. And there was a local guy from a private Catholic school, St. John the Baptist in West Islip in Long Island. His name was John Farmer, and he got picked up by St. John's, and so he was my oldest brother's high school teammate, and so we'd go in and see. We went in and saw my first game at St. John's. But the Coach Conosecca is bigger than life.
Yeah.
He is an incredible motivator. He's extremely adept at using the tools that he was given. He didn't have the big, beautiful university to sell. He didn't, and he never said no to really anything or anybody. You needed help or players. I was pretty distraught when I left North Carolina. I had thought every kid goes through this, and I thought I'd failed and just wasn't a fit. But as soon as I got there, he put his arm around me and he said, "You don't worry about it. We'll take good care of you." And from that point on, he could tell me to run through a wall, and I do it twice.
Yeah, so, it's funny that different coaches can get you to do just that with different motivations, right? So, and
he got Walter Berry to run up and down the court. That's for sure.
that was probably not an easy chore, I'm guessing, not having met Walter, but.
Walter is a tremendous, tremendous athlete and just a great, great player. And again, he fell under the spell of Coach Conosecca, and his last year he got Player of the Year, and deservedly so.
Yeah. So as you move through your career at St. John's, I mean, you obviously improved as a player personally. The team was still fairly competitive. As I said, you went to the NCAA tournament the first couple of years. Mm-hmm. I think your senior year, you may have missed the tournament. Is that right? Did you play in the NIT?
My senior year, we played in the NIT, and we actually won the NIT.
Oh, that's right. You did win the NIT. I did check that.
In 1989. So, again, I played with some really terrific players, and it was just a mixture of guys, but we were all a unit, and we were all great, great friends. There was never any dissension. You just never thought about it. At least in those days, you just didn't think about it. And we went out and we fought for a cause, and that's what it felt like. You were going to war every night, and Conosecca would be able to get you going, and we had to protect our backyard, which was Madison Square Garden.
Yeah. How did it feel, your senior year winning that NIT? Was that satisfying, or was it a letdown? I mean, the NIT was still, a little bit bigger deal than it is today in that at that time, but not the big deal that it was maybe 10 years before that. I mean, what did that feel like?
Well, we were disappointed, of course, that we didn't get into the tournament, but our record, didn't really warrant us getting there, so it was fair. We started 3 freshmen, Rob Wardan, tragically the late Malik Sealy, and
great player.
Up by you, Jason Buchanan, who was our freshman point guard, who weighed probably about 120 pounds all up, so. And then it was Jason Williams, wonderful guy and forward, and myself. I was the captain of that club, and I think we ended up going like 14-9 or 15-9, and it was disappointing. But we got into the NIT, and I'll tell you, it's a very difficult thing as a coach, and having coached on the high school level and just sort of for what I thought was for fun. It's very difficult motivating people, as a former player, your brain's telling you, all right, get there, your body can't, but, anymore, but, your brain is, we're working with these kids and like, how come they're not doing this? And you have to motivate them. And Coach Kornacek got us motivated. And we played some tough teams. We played Ohio State. And we played a lot of good teams in that tournament. And, as we went along, I think we played Mississippi State at home, and we're just like, who are these teams? And, there was a bit of dejection, kind of in the mindset. But, once we won the first 1 or 2 games, like, wait, this could be interesting. And then it was on, and we took it from there, and we won a buzzer beater at Ohio State. The place was jammed, and it's some wonderful games. In fact, I almost wrecked the Ohio State game. We ended up going up by 2, and with 2 seconds left, and they do somebody does a desperate heave, and I'm under the far end of the basket, so I jump and catch the ball in front of the rim. And Gary Williams, I believe, I'm not sure, I believe it was Gary Williams, who was the coach of Ohio State, is screaming at the refs.
Unlike him, Gary.
I think it was Gary Williams. I could be wrong with the coach, but he's screaming at the referees. That's goaltending. So the next thing I feel, not what I feel, is Coach Brian Mahoney grabbing me and saying, "Let's get the hell out of here. What is wrong with you?" And I didn't know and I'm like, "What are you so upset about? We won. It's great." And they're yelling at me as I'm going to get to the locker room. Let's get to the bus. We got to get to the plane and get out of here before they change their mind. I'm like, we're getting like a bunch of gangsters getting out of town. I'm like, what happened? And he said, "You dope." And that's using a kind adjective. You catch the ball in front of the rim, you let it go, and I'm like, oh, that's okay. Well, I aged the coaching staff by probably about 10 years with that maneuver, but one of many, I'm unfortunately. But we had some. It was a wonderful time. Yeah.
Talk to me about a couple of the guys that you play. You've mentioned quite a few really good players, had pretty good NBA careers. Mark Jackson, obviously.
Right.
Willie Glass, Malik Sealy was a great player. Unfortunately, was taken away too early. Jason Williams, his own issues, but a great player when he played. Walter Berry never really made it to the next level. Who surprised you? I guess who surprised you by making it on the next level as well as they did, and who maybe are you surprised didn't do better?
I really thought. I think no one really disappointed me. I can tell you that. I think it's a different level when you go to the NBA. And I found I liked it. Bigger bodies, different type of game, different style of game. And in those days, it was rough. So it was right up my alley. But with these, the guy that really, I was so pleased, and so happy to see do very, very well was Mark Jackson. That guy worked so hard. I remember being at Alumni Hall, and it was after classes, and practice. The gym was open for intramural basketball, and the season hadn't started yet. And I remember Chris Mullen was back at the school, and the Mullen family and Chris and his younger brother Terrence I played with, we're all good friends. And I remember Chris Mullen just going playing one-on-one with Mark Jackson, and everyone's kind of leaning over the railing and looking down and watching, and Chris is just draining shot after shot after shot. Mark would go out and play him on the perimeter, and he'd drive right by him, and all 6'7" of Chris Mullen could just get over the rim and dunk it. It was tough, but he did it. But he was just unfortunately just killing poor Mark. And I remember being the wise ass New Yorker. I shouted down, "Hey Mark, how's it feel?" And I remember him turning and looking at me, and I'll never forget it. He said, "At least I'm down here." And I thought, wow. And I walked away, and I felt embarrassed because that was kind of like my forte was the working hard. And he constantly worked on his game. He worked on his strength, his conditioning. Was afraid of nobody. A lot of Coach Carnesecca influence there. And he did really, really wonderful. As far as disappointment, there really wasn't disappointments. I really had wished Walter had gone a little further. Not sure, really why. But I know he was with, as Coach would say, he was with Willis. And he's always naming these guys by their first name. And I'm like, who is that? I knew Willis Reed, of course, but Willis Reed was the GM of the Nets at the time. He goes, well, he's with Willis, so he should do well. And Walter in his own right did well. And I think you're as good as your heart and your talents take you. And now there was no disappointments with anybody, but Mark was one of the exceptions.
Well, let's pivot to your own move to the NBA. You didn't get drafted, but you went to the Bulls as an undrafted free agent. And it's funny, in doing a little research, I pulled up an old Chicago Tribune article that talked about there's certain things that one just doesn't do if he intends to play for the Bulls. And one was not to eat popcorn on the bench like Quentin Daly did. And there was something else. And it said that, but the point was one thing you especially don't want to do is anger Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
And you actually pulled that off, I believe, in trying to make the Bulls.
Yeah, it's really funny. We had talked about this off air a little bit, and we'll share it with your audience. I came into Chicago. They had first of all, Jerry Krause was a terrific general manager. Again, another law. He had passed away a few years ago, but he had called me in with Phil Jackson. It was Phil's first year into New York, and they were playing the Knicks in the playoffs. And Coach Carnesecca said, "I got this note. I got this call from Jerry Krause," and I'm like, "Who's that?" And he said, "Chicago Bulls. They want to meet you in New York." So I'm like, "Okay, great. A front office job. That would be really cool." So I went in and sat down with Jerry, Phil, and Tex Winter. And you say Tex Winter, everybody knows who he is. Wonderful coach and the creator of the the famous triangle offense.
Yeah.
And so I go in there in my suit and tie, and I carry a briefcase that's totally empty. So I'm just trying to,
You thought you were applying for an executive job.
Well, I was a finance major, so I'm like, okay, I've got real financial data in here, and thank God they didn't ask me to open the briefcase. They had said to me, "You're misunderstanding us. We want you to try out for the team." And I'm like, "You're putting me on." And they said, "No, there's a tryout June 1st. And we're looking for a couple guys, and they're concerned." In those days, the Pistons had their way with Michael and the Bulls because the Bulls were still a little bit too much finesse. And they wanted to harden them up, and they had to. I mean, you look at the Pistons; they had Dennis Rodman, who was an incredible defender, and just all
Finesse is not a word you would use to describe that team for sure.
yeah. And they had Bill Laimbeer, who, had a corner jump shot, but, would just create all kinds of havoc on defense. And John Sally, and of course Isaiah, and Vinnie Johnson, and Joe Dumars. So they were very, very physical. And Chicago had the prior, I think, year or two just couldn't get past them. So Jerry had this idea, come on in, and we want someone to really beat on our guys. And so, okay. So I show up June 1st, and there's 200 guys there. And I'm like, can you believe that? I'm in the middle of Chicago. I just want to go home. I says, 200 guys, and they're going to pick two. So I was the first day they cut, it was a 3-day tryout. First day they cut 150 guys. And at the time there was a standout from DePaul who everyone had their money on making the team. I'm trying to forget who he was. He was kind of my build, but God, I hate I'm sure your viewers hate that when you forget names.
Happens to me all the time. Don't worry.
Yeah. It's the age for me. But he and 200 guys cut first day. Next day, they cut it down to 10. And I was still there. I would sit by my phone in the local Marriott and, be eating probably 20 or 30 minutes a minute, waiting for the phone to ring, and it just never rang. Because when the phone rang, that was the death call. So then the final day they cut it down to 2, and again my phone didn't ring. So I had become friendly in some of the pickup sessions later on with John Paxson and Mo Perdue, and to name a couple guys, and they were just so kind to me, and we're so happy you made it this far. This is terrific. And so I was one of the guys. So they said, okay, you come back. We're going to start rookie camp, and then we're going to go into the summer league season, and then we're going to go to veteran camp, and we'll see how far you go. So you show up again at rookie camp, and they bring in a whole slew of other guys. So we were in rookie camp for a couple weeks, and then they had 75 guys, cut it down to a team of 10, and the rookies and would play that they had drafted was BJ Armstrong, Stacey King, and I believe it was Jeff Sanders, I believe was the third pick. I could be wrong on that. I'm trying. It's again, the mind wants to work, but it doesn't work.
The harder you try to make it work,
yeah, exactly. So they had 3 rookies, so it was a daunting test even to try to make the team. But so those guys were on the club, and we went out to California and played in the summer league. Then they cut it down. They brought obviously the contract guys, and the guys they drafted were in the veteran camp, and they took 2 guys to the big club, and I was one of them. So it was really terrific. So to what you're referring, I knew Michael since he was a freshman at North Carolina from my brother. And like most people, and there's no shame involved, Michael would get the ball and you'd be staring at him and you just crumple to the ground. I mean, that happened too many times. And through his great career, you just saw the incredible athletic and things that he did. And I have to say this about Michael, I've never seen, he's like Babe Ruth, Ted Williams, Ty Cobb, whomever, pick the greatest ever. That guy, I have the utmost respect for, because he had the biggest heart. I mean, the guy was so competitive, it was crazy. He would get out in the parking lot after practice and say, I'll bet you $50,000, I'll get to my car before yours. So I'm like, I get per diem, I get $50 a day. I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. I'll spot you. He was
we saw that in The Last Dance where he's flipping quarters in the locker room, right? Wasn't it flipping quarters?
Just a competitive junkie. I mean, you want to talk about addictive behavior or God knows what. I mean, man, he was just, I'd hate to think what he would do if he wasn't, it didn't play basketball, you know. But so we're in camp, and Jerry comes over and says, okay, I want you to, take Michael and, push him around. So, yeah, of course, I'm like, fine, I have no fear of who he is. And as I knew him, and he didn't, and he knew me. He said, "Hey, Brusty, how you doing?" And called me Brusty. And I said, "Good." And he goes, "You ready to get beat on?" And I was like, and so of course, with me, my mentality was, I was very, very naive, let's call it that. And it served me well. So I said, "Sure, it's on." So we had this, where the story was generated from Charlie Rosen and the Chicago Tribune. We had we were going 2 and 3 a day. It was rough. And the last session was in a squad scrimmage, and we were going five 12-minute quarters. So the first quarter we come down once or twice, and Bill Cartwright was on that club, and I'm guarding Michael, and he pulls me way out on the wing, and I get sucked into chasing him out on the wing, and before I know it, I got Bill Cartwright's elbow in my mouth, and next thing I know, they throw a lob to Michael, and he dunks it. And of course the oohs and the ahs, and and so we're running back down the court, and competitively he says, "Don't worry, Matty, you're just one of the many I've done that to." I said, "Really?" So I said, "Okay, try it again." So the story is a very romantic story. I'll give it a few Pinocchios from this point on, because this kind of what really went on. And again, I told you off when we spoke a while back. My daughters caught the article when they came into being, and I told them the whole story, and they were like, "Let's call him up and have a retraction. This is terrible." And I'm like, no, it's all for laughs. I said, it's easy, don't worry. It's funny. You'll get it one day. But we're playing, so they call the same play, 2 plays later. So I pretend to be I'm going to get taken out, and I slip Bill's screen, which is hard to do. He's about 7 foot wide with his elbows spread out.
Yeah.
And they throw the lob, and Michael goes to jump, and I stepped in front of him, and I forearmed him and caught him in the Adam's apple. So down he goes. He's, and so is the coaching staff, the franchise, and everything. Right. So I just kind of look at him. I'm like, "You okay?" And I didn't mean to be a wise guy about it. I just was like, "Are you all right?" So from then on, it was just a war. We were going back and forth, and I don't think I've ever seen Michael Jordan rattled in any situation, but that day he was quite rattled. And I remember Horace Grant coming up to me and Scotty. They're like, "Keep going, man. You're gonna make this plug. You pissed off." And later on, of course, the Jordan rules came out, so all this stuff was factoring into what they thought treatment was fair or unfair. I don't know anything about that, but like just go at him, and not. And so they're all talking in his ear. So Michael, the uber competitive he is, wasn't holding back. But I had learned some of my basketball from him, watching him as a kid. One thing in particular, he perfected. He would do that jump back. He would catch the ball on the block or somewhere around the basket and jump backwards and kick his legs out from underneath and create space. And a lot of guys copy that. I saw Kobe copy that when he came into the league, and a lot of young guys did that and create space for that fall away jump shot, which is not what you teach as a coach. But of course, Michael could do virtually anything he wanted. But he had learned how to defend that, and how he did it was he would jump across your body and use instead of your strong hand, your right hand to block the shot, he'd use his left hand and kind of curl it over and try to catch the ball. So I tried it, worked, and it worked twice. So I think we both. I think I'm the only person. I think I ever outscored him in a game. I probably had like 8 points, and he had 6. He was so upset and so angry. And I'm thinking, I'm doing my job. This is what they brought me in for. I'm in, man. So we come out, and we're in the fifth quarter, and we come out of the timeout, and he's just like a bull, just chuffing and just angry as hell. And before they inbound the ball, he tries to create space and hits me with an elbow across my forehead. And the place goes quiet, and I get up, and again, my mindset with athletics is I just kind of shut off the thinking and just played. It didn't matter who was there. So I just kind of looked at Phil, and I said, "What the heck's going on here?" I used more colorful language than that, and she said, "Okay, practice is over. That's it." So but Michael
didn't ask you if you were okay.
Yeah, I was fine. I weathered it fine. But as the story goes, it's Michael jumped over a brick wall, ran through me, stepped on my face, did a curl cue in the air, and dunked it. And poor Charlie Rose, he's another great writer who passed a number of years back. I did think about calling him. My daughters were on me. I mean, my daughters were, and I lovingly say, I said, "You girls are like badgers, man." I said, "You just won't leave this alone." I said, just let it go. So I said, "All right, I'll make the call."
In the genes.
Yeah, for sure. And neither of them, played sports, which I was grateful for. It's such to hurt, it just hurts.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a terrific experience, and it really was kind of the pinnacle of my athletic experience, because I felt that here I was with what turned out to be one of the greatest teams, if not the greatest team ever assembled. I'd take that Chicago team over anybody ever assembled. And not only was I there, I performed pretty well. And unfortunately, it was a numbers game. They had 3 rookies, and they wanted me to be in there at their minor league, the old CBA, before that was destroyed. And it was the Rockford Lightning. So, as soon as someone goes down, and someone always goes down, you play with them and we'll pull you up. And I just was like, no thanks. I was, again, being from New York and having the exposure in New York and what little sort of notoriety I had, and it was notorious. I had my degree, and I ended up going down to Wall Street, and I was able to leave at the top of sort of at my peak, which I'm so grateful that so many players and coaches and athletes have regrets, and I can't say that I have one.
Well, that's awesome that you can look back on that experience and not have regrets about, because so many guys expect to move on to the next level, right? You had no expectation at all. Thought you were interviewing for. I didn't know that story. That's an awesome story that want you to try out, and you think you're getting a job in the front office. That's awesome.
My empty briefcase. That was great, and they're looking at me like, okay, if he was carrying a basketball, that would make more sense. But he's in a suit, and I wouldn't be too normal either. We're at the Marriott Marquis in Manhattan.
Yeah. I find interesting as we're talking about this, and we talked a little bit about this on the phone the other day. I mean, the NBA was obviously different back then, right? Much more physical. You and I talked earlier. The NBA is more physical than the NFL is today, I think, back then. I think about those Knicks and Bulls series. And I got to believe that Phil Jackson loved Matt Brust, given Phil Jackson's career, as a striker.
We used to work with Phil. Yeah, when he was a player, he was all elbows, and shit. Yeah.
But if a Matt Brust could make it in that era, is a Matt Brust ever going to make it again in the NBA the way the game's played today?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Matt Brust tried. I know you're too old to play. I don't mean you specifically.
Well, yeah, I know. And I'm for the guys who are diving all over the court.
Yeah.
Doing those things. I think, honestly, it's kind of everyone's chasing the same thing. Whatever is kind of the hottest trend, whether it's athletics, whether it's in clothing line or retail or things like that, or God knows what. But everyone kind of chases the same thing. And I think if you kind of can create a widget, so to speak, or a widget of a person that's kind of a throwback or different. I think, yeah, I think, there's room for that. I don't know if the referees would agree with you and the
Yeah,
league
right.
would agree with me, but yeah, I think there's room, and
That's
the
good.
game certainly changed. Yeah,
It has, and I'll be honest with you, I liked the game a lot better when I was watching the Knicks and Bulls scrap in the late '80s and '90s, early '90s. Those were fun series to watch. Maybe the players weren't having as much fun because they were beating each other up, but it was
honestly, the players were having a blast. And just to, I think it's part of the human condition to kind of need to climb a mountain, and athletics at that time was just that. It's let it go, let him play. And Michael took a lot of abuse. He really took a lot. I was watching recently one of the many HBO specials. Now there's an HBO special for everything, right? But there was a special about the Bulls and his show, of course. The Pistons. Their Chuck Daly's defensive plan with Michael was, if he comes anywhere near the basket, knock him to the floor.
Yeah.
And basically the idea was just to literally, it was like a prize fight, to just wear him down until he just couldn't take it anymore. The one clearly he was underestimated because I think Michael was like a rabid bulldog that got a hold of the bone, and nobody was prying that from his jaws, and he took to the challenge beautifully. And yeah, it was there's of course you get older and there's a romance to way back when, and no one understands that more than me, but yeah, it was a wonderful time for basketball, and just the struggles up and down in the play. I would wait for the playoffs because that's when guys would really turn it on, and it wasn't necessarily a player issue. It was, I just believe the season was way too long. I mean, you're playing 80 games of basketball, and you have to, and what the public doesn't see in a lot of these shows, they see the end product, so they assume, oh, these guys, what do they have to complain about? And they don't understand the plane rides, the walkthroughs the next day when you can't even walk because you're so beat up and bruised and banged up. Even today, the same thing. I mean, you see the final product, but you don't see what it takes to get there and what these guys go through. They leave their families, and it's a whole other level on the NBA when you make it in the NBA. And there's so many things and intangibles that you can't just shoo away as, well, you're making X amount of dollars and you should be like this. There is no should. You could pay someone as much money as you want. If they get hurt, they get hurt.
Right.
Not going to save you.
Right. It's a great perspective. Let me circle back. We only got a couple minutes left, but I did want to circle back real quick. And I know that you haven't stayed as close to the St. John's program recently, but since your days there, since Coach Carnesecca left, I mean, Coach Carnesecca, he may never won a national championship, but he was very consistent. His teams are very consistent year after year. And since then, I mean, there's been some, ups and downs. Brian Mahoney was there and was okay for a couple of years. Fran Fraschilla comes in and I guess has one good year maybe, and then things happen. Mike Jarvis, same thing. He had a couple of really good teams and things happen. And since then, it's been kind of a wasteland. Until recently. I think there's some light at the end of the tunnel with Mike Anderson now. But what's your thoughts just overall, Matt, about where the program was when you were there, when Coach Carnesecca was in charge, and what's happened over the last 20 some years, I guess now?
Well, I'll use, one thing I want to make a correction. Coach Carnesecca won 2 national championships. The year I was born, in 1965, they won the NIT when the NIT was the NIT.
Okay, good point.
Yeah, and when my year in '89, so it was a bit of a drought, but they won multiple
excellent point
awards and things like that. But
I guess I'm like everybody else. I put too much emphasis on the NCAA.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Hey, we as Coach Carson says, hey, a win's a win.
Right.
Keep your mouth closed.
Right.
About. But no, it's interesting. What's the sort of metamorphosis of the program? Clearly, Coach Carnesecca I think the genius of Coach Carnesecca is you can see it much clearer today what he did with the very few tools that he had.
Yeah.
I mean, he won not for 1 year, but he won year in, year out for 40 years.
Yeah.
40 years. And to do it in New York, I mean, we talked about the press corps a little bit earlier. I mean, it wasn't like, Coach Carnesecca, how do you feel about your team? It was like, how come you lost? Are you outdated? Is the game passed you by and stuff like that? And I happen to be fortunate to be in a lot of those interviews, and I don't need that. But no, the program has changed a lot. I think they've tried to keep up with kind of this. They traded in to be this sort of big school mentality. And as Coach would say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And
Right.
I think they're getting back to that. And when Chris Mullen was there, I think he changed the trajectory a little bit, and he did a really a good job with tough tools. And but hopefully, there is some light at the end of the tunnel.
I think Mike Anderson's done a great job and overachieved there the last couple of years, and he's got some building blocks there if the kids stay.
Yeah, it's very exciting to watch. I'm very pleased to see. I mean, I didn't know Mike. I haven't met him, but he's done a terrific job. They had a nice run this year. I mean, 7.
The last couple of weeks kind of sunk their tournament chances unless they have a good run in the Big East tournament. But all in all, still a very successful year, I think. They beat a really good Villanova team. So
yeah. St. John's is like that. It as Coach would say, no one we play is going to be a piece of cake, and I would say that about St. John's. I mean, you might write them off, but they always have a lot of talented guys, and it's a matter of getting them all going in the same direction. But I think they'll get there.
Well, I appreciate. We're coming up at 9, a little after 9, so I know I promised you an hour. I really appreciate you coming on and chatting with me today, Matt. I mean, I've said this, and this isn't just to blow smoke. A lot of the guys that I've had on, whether they're ex-baseball players or basketball players like yourself, a lot of them I've had on are guys like you that to me aren't, they don't get all the headlines, but they're the guys that make the teams go. And I really enjoy having these conversations with guys like you, and I mean that sincerely. So,
well, thank you very much for having me on.
And stick around for a second, if you can. I'm going to wrap up the show, and I want to chat about with one other thing, if I could.
Sure.
Thanks for coming on. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
My guest today, Matt Brust. What a great conversation. I love chatting with the Matt Brust of the world. And again, they've got a lot of stories to bring. We probably could have gone on for another hour. Unfortunately, we don't have that time. But we hope to talk to Matt again, potentially down the road. So I thank Matt for his time. I want to remind you that next week we will have Tony Red Bruin and Eric Sanifer from Syracuse University a little bit before Matt's time in the Big East. They'll be on Friday, next Friday. And then we've got the Big East preview show coming up on March 8th, Monday. We'll be on for a couple hours that night. We're going to have some special guests. We'll do some previews, and there'll be some surprises as well. So join us then. Until then, you guys have a great weekend. I'll see you Sunday morning. We'll kind of cover everything in sports from 9 to 11 Eastern time. Keith Engel, TGI Sports. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.